Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on October the 2nd, 2016. It's quite something to watch all these mass movements across the world, all funded from the same sources, generally your tax money, as they push towards globalization through private organizations, which lead the charge and have all their think tanks drafting it and so on. And I've mentioned this so many times in the past that I get fed up talking about it, but it's never been clearer than it is today. You have every facet of life is studied so intricately and minutely, because if the big boys, you see, push any part of the agenda too quickly, then it might not take. And that's what they call it, like an inoculation. It might not take, it might not work. And so they really do tremendous studies across the world, and even adapt the studies and indoctrinations towards their what they want, their desired endings in particular areas and changes on the chatter through the internet and everything else, and which certain universities get a hold of by law, you see, by your big boys. NSA shares it with MIT and things like that, certain faculties within them, and they get to do studies on all of us, you see. And they see if we're debauched enough, for instance, to push the rung of the ladder on any kind of sexual area, for instance, you see. And things like that is going to be right on cue with it all, or it won't work. You see, there might be some backlash. They might actually find somebody left there who hasn't been asleep, or they believe in something. See, most folk today don't believe in anything except the material world. They're in the Marxian material world, and the world that's been shaped for them through their indoctrination by what they call the experts, that they're always partying on about, you see. Experts, you see. So all the big boys that helped plan this phase a long time ago, who are all dead now, but they actually planned the phases and changes we're going through right now, and the changes that led up to it, because every change is always preceded by a previous change, you see, getting you step by step ready to accept the ultimate, whatever it happens to be. And it's a long time in the making, but it works awfully well this way. And it's so perfect now, as I say, with the internet and people twittering and tweeting and all that kind of stuff, constantly, daily, many times a day, in real time. So they do have the pulse of the public across the planet now on where their heads are, how their indoctrination is working with them, and all the rest of it. And you are getting indoctrination. You really are. What got me was a long time ago, it was to really study the big boys in their own books, and they mentioned how easy it is, and how easy it would be to completely reverse all social norms, given time and the right equipment, meaning television, radio, movies, that kind of thing, and indoctrination actually through the school system. And over a period of time, maybe 1-2 generations, they could, and by that they meant every 20 years basically, that they could really push the button to the next phase and the next phase and the next phase, and literally have us facing backwards if they wanted that to happen. That's why they brought behaviorists into all of this. That's why they even created the whole supposed science, social science of behaviorist studies, to see how we learn and what teaches us, what things specifically teach us to learn, and how to use these techniques on the public themselves to predict how the public will be at the end of all their indoctrinated learning. It's been awfully successful, and I have to admit that there's no doubt about it when now you have all kinds of walks of life, right up to people who are really into old age, who are watching porn all day long. And sometimes the ones that go to church will watch what they call soft porn. Well, it's only 50 Shades of Grey and things like that. But these things are all meant to push you to the next thing. Oh, that titillated your senses. Let's look to the next thing. That's how it's so easy, isn't it, to change you by the big boys themselves. Remember, too, that when you're being entertained, as I've said so many times, you're being programmed, because that's what really it's about. Within within the entertainment movie, it doesn't matter what the story happens to be, you'll often see things just thrown in there that have nothing to do with the story. And that's generally on the part of the programming, you see, that they're just throwing in there. Repetition, 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 until you get the point, or your subconscious gets the point, and you're getting programmed in Pavlovian style of responses, you see. It's really rather simple. And in an age where it's taboo, it's taboo to have your personal opinions on things, especially if it's still holding on to sanity, for instance. That will be a crime shortly, to hold on to sanity. When you actually use your senses and sensibilities and rationale, and you don't see what you're told by the state that you must see, just like George Orwell's 1984. It's pretty well here already, in fact, under different guises. If you just say that I can't see what you're being told, you must see as a particular category of people, or whatever it happens to be. A special category. You see, today we're all special categories. If you're not in one, you've had it. You've got to find something to belong to now. Or you really have had it altogether. Because that's what they call at the top democracy. And people want special status, you see. Everybody wants to be special today. That's also becoming more and more common, this idea of being special, by everybody wanting to be a star on their Facebook or whatever it happens to be. This is all part of it, folks. The reality shows you've been programmed along the way until you can't think logically anymore. And now you do have folk that literally do want to be a star, and if you can't be a star, you've got to pick something else to get into some special category or other, you see, to get attention and to get special privileges and be treated even with more respect than, say, the general population happens to get. The general population generally don't really want respect. They just, I think they're in a dream most of the time, and they simply go through their Pavlovian responses to everything, all the prompts that they're given on a daily basis. And that's what the big boys would say as well, of course. But as I say, you can see they're on a roll now, a global roll. All you hear about now is the globalization, how they must not only save it, but finish it, complete it. The end of nations, the end of borders, the end of this, end of that. And it really is going to have a massive upheaval. It's already having massive upheaval across the planet in certain places, even more so than others. It's quite something else, I'm telling you, this planned socialist system. Remember, in socialism, under all their nonsense and rubbish, socialism's about the planned by experts system, from birth to death for everybody. That's what it's about. That's what it's about. Obedience by the masses, and here's how to get them obedient. And so today it's great. You just give them a TV set and a computer and a cell phone. It's quite simple. And in no time at all, they'll learn to be what the elite want to be called the new normal, you see. And they are. They know, and they'll parrot, but they're told to parrot. If the sky is a nice sunny blue sky, which is rare these days, I admit, well, the spring, they'll tell you it's black, because they're all told it's black at the same time. Or snow is black, you see. Or everybody will believe that snow is different shades of grey. As Bertrand Russell said, they could teach the public to believe that, if you got them early enough. And it's very, very true. Very true. Most folk want to conform to the peer group. That's just the way it is. They'd rather avoid any conflict or any pain of conflict or caused by conflict and just get along. And they're getting along until they're not allowed to have any brain at all, unless it's passed and authorized, a standardized brain. I hope you realize we're in the system. Remember the Socialist Republic of old Russia, the old system, the Soviet system, the Soviet Socialist Republic. They locked people up who still saw things as they were. It's a sad thing to say, but if you still see things as they were, or they are, then you'll be classed as mad by the state. That's what I'm talking about. Because obviously, if you had any criticism of the state back then, you had to obviously be mad because it was the greatest thing that had ever been invented. It was a science. It was. You couldn't complain about it. You couldn't find fault in it. It was perfect, you see. So you had to be mad, and they locked you up. And I'm not kidding about that. That was happened to a lot of people. Yeah. Today, the same technique is used elsewhere in the world. When they don't want you to go through a court system, they just classify you as mad, and you bypass the courts. And so you don't have, you don't get a chance to say anything to the public or a jury or anything else. And that's a common thing that they'll use. You see, you're obviously mad, and that's it. The experts have spoken, and you can buy experts all over the world rather cheaply these days. And you can rent an expert or a few experts any time of the week across the planet, all different prices, of course. And the more respectable they are, the more, in other words, the more they've had their face in different magazines, because that's all it means, really, then the more you have to pay. But some countries don't charge value-added tax to hire these experts to put someone away. And they'll lie about everything. For a good fee, they'll lie about anything. Bernays went on about that, Eddie Bernays. For the big medical associations and so on. He says it's very easy to get people to buy things that you want them to buy. He says what you do is make them think that professionals prefer. Therefore, he would set up little offices in a street level, cheap, and get a title for it, that sounds all very officious and very, very legitimate. To do with medicine or psychiatry or whatever it happens to be, or even automobiles and so on, and then that would suddenly get plastered across the magazines in the country and in the newspapers. These professors say so and so. They belong to this association based at blah blah blah, and all they had to do was hire one little secretary who sat there doing nothing pretty well. But anybody who checked up on it, she would answer the phone, and, well, gee whiz, so it is real after all. And they said we should all take this particular pill, and it'll stop us falling off the planet. So it's that's how you do things. It works awfully well. People have been taught not to trust their own instincts or their own reason today, you see. And it's becoming very easy to change the public if experts say so. You've all been trained in it too. And if you notice too, you always have the experts changing the story, especially in medicine, for instance. It's awfully good for that way. They'll tell you, or even dieting, for instance, don't eat this and eat that and blah, blah, and fat's bad for you. That came out too, was exposed. The big sugar consortiums back in the early 60s were worried about all the complaints about the children eating too much candies and getting obesity. And so they drummed up the same idea, got some professionals, hired a few, to say, it was 4 of them that they hired, to say that fat was making them overweight, you see. And that's why you had this massive thing, don't eat that, it'll clog your arteries. Now you take all these different oils that clog it up even faster. Everything is full of chronology, you see. That's the greatest science of all. Chronology. Now, rather than go into all the stuff I've said long ago and many times since about the trade deals and where it all came from, and the whole act of globalization, what it really means and where it came from and who runs it all at the top. Because I've done it all in the past, and you have to go into the archive section at cuttingthroughthematrix.com to find them. And by the way, now that I mention that too, should you have any problems getting into cuttingthroughthematrix.com, look at the other sites on the page, the front page there, that I have, because you might need them in the future, maybe even quicker than you think, if anything's pooled with the transfer of all the ICANN things and so on that's going on right now. So you never know. You'll never know. So until it happens, then there'll be, where are you? Where are you? You see, that's it. It's that can be that fast. That's what power is power today in globalization is about concentrating all power in the hands of fewer and fewer people. I hope you understand that. across the planet. When the big agribusinesses, for instance, have control of the world's food supply, and that includes the big Monsanto groups and all the guys that they've sold into all the other corporations, which are all the same corporation. It's very much like Standard Oil. They just made a whole bunch of front companies as well, and then sold each of themselves over and over to their front companies. It's a joke. I mean, you're going to find very few people really run the world, folks. But when they have your food supply there, they can start culling us off. They're already doing it with what they're feeding you as food. Come on. Agencies that are supposed to protect you from some of the chemicals, no, they pass everything, don't they? Don't they? You're eating all the pesticides and herbicides and God knows what else all the time in your food, and that's okay. Even though the folk that work in these GMO places and the chemical places won't eat it themselves, you're supposed to eat it, and most of you do. And you wonder why all these cancers come from. You wonder why the endocrine disruptors are changing appearances and so on. Mind you, if you want to change a lot of appearances of the population, you can make them less aggressive, remember? And the military's talked about that with some of their special things there. How to spray stuff over the public, for instance. So rather than spray them, why not just put it in their food? It's rather logical if you're really an enemy of the people. And the changes are there. It's nothing to do with evolution. Come on. You don't suddenly all change within a span of 40 years in so many different ways. It doesn't happen by itself. And since there's no crisis about it, then your owners, you see, the big farmers who own you, and we are owned, folks. We are definitely owned. We are, we are a workforce. We're this, that, the other. We make it possible, everything possible for the elite themselves to have an awfully good life, way above anything you can imagine. Then you understand, they can change you and pacify you. What do you think a domestic cow is? Do you think it started that way? Do you think that the domestic sheep just got there by themselves until they're nervous, neurotic, crazy little animals? No, they're bred and inbred to get passivity. That's what you do with them. A peaceful world, eh? For whom? What was it Galton, Darwin, the rest of them said that they'd have to remain the wild men at the top? Because they have to make all the decisions. See, everybody else would be too passive and too into themselves or playing with different parts of their bodies to even care about who's doing what in the world. They'll go along with anything. That's how it is. Now, here's some of the articles. The boring stuff. I know it's boring. You want entertainment because that's what you've been conditioned to have. And I'll give you some of the boring stuff. Regardless, you see, of what's been going on and things you should know, for those who really want to know, because it shows you behind the scenes, they're awfully busy. They always are so busy with their 10-year plans for one part and 5-year plans for another, 15-year plans for the plans that were just signed there at the Paris Agreement, of course. Things like that. They all have it worked out perfectly as to the next phase, and during that 15 years you have nothing but more and more propaganda till you think it's all quite natural, you see. Sustainability for socialist leaders is how many folk are they going to allow to live? The planned population. That's all part of it. And it's a great thing, the environment, etc., sustainability. To do it all. They couldn't do it. They tried it the other way. No one would go for it. So you scare them. They say, oh, look at the weather's changing. Most folk can't remember one year to the next. I've asked lots of them. They can't remember what it was like the previous year. It's astonishing. It's so easy to con them. And that's what they do at the top, you see. We've always had storms. We've always had hurricanes. We've always had bouts of rain and bouts of dry weather. That's what we call just the weather. That's what weather means. If the weather didn't change, you wouldn't have the word weather. It would always be the same. The mind jobs that are done in us all are something else, aren't they? Really, they're something else. But even though you say it doesn't really matter, because whole generations have been brainwashed into this. Anyone watching TV has already been brainwashed into everything I'm saying. They believe everything that they've been told. They'll see a big wave coming in the sea and over again, just like the buildings in 9/11 going down over and over and over ad nauseum, you see. Psychic driving. Then they believe it. They believe what they're told. And let's be honest, 2 big office towers went down and it's to change. The world's changed. Never mind the one that fell down by itself, 7. But let's be honest, you change the world. This is the excuse they used. This is the excuse that was given. Because 2 office towers went down, office buildings. Think about it. So I'll just touch on Canada woos skeptical EU left on trade deal. So it's they're still trying to get this EU one through, you see, and supposedly they tried it before, and it's on 20th of October again. The last time it was finished in 2014, kind of left hanging there. So now they're going for the next part. The whole idea is to legalism is quite something, isn't it? This legalism. Well, we signed an agreement. Well, I didn't sign it. Did you sign it? Most folk don't even know what's going on. They don't. They really don't. And then they use terms like Canada signs or what is Canada? It's a corporation. It's a name. It's a corporate name. That's how they're referring to it here. So people who work for the corporation sign something, negotiate something, but the rest of the folk that comprise this thing called Canada, which is the general population, don't even know what's going on. They aren't asked anything about it. See, in Britain does blah, blah, I've heard it my whole life too. Or Japan or Norway, or whatever. This is how they play this game, you see. And that because they use this term democracy. If you're truly a democracy, you should be involved and be given a say in something that affects you. But you're not. You're not given a say. Quite something, right? Anyway, Canada was a skeptical EU left on the trade deal. And it says that they'll discuss ways of taking CETA, C-E-T-A, forward. Faced with widespread opposition to the agreement, the European Commission vowed in July to put the deal up for ratification not only by the 2 other EU institutions, Parliament and Council, but also national and in some cases regional assemblies. It's quite fascinating to see this whole idea of Marxists' centralization of government. So you simply knock away the government's powers, individual governments, put them into a block like the EU, and then put the right guys in at the very top in the Commission, not in the Parliament, because the Commission makes all the decisions. And you can do whatever you want then. Same with NAFTA, you see. North American. So there you go. I'll put this up too for those who want to have a look through it. I don't have to read it all. You can read it yourselves if you care. Most folk don't. They want entertainment, as I say. And then Brexit, the true cost of the UK leaving the EU without a trade deal revealed. And it says damage to Britain's goods export of leaving the European Union without a new free trade deal in place would be at least £4.5 billion a year. In all likelihoods, many multiples of that, investigation by the Independents found. And then it says David Davis, Brexit Secretary, admitted earlier this month that it was possible the UK could leave the EU without a trade deal and would be forced to trade with the rest of the continent under World Trade Organization rules. Well, why don't they just trade with the rest of the world anyway? Who cares about all these different rules? I mean, for centuries and centuries, countries trade with each other all over the planet. That's what trade is. Before you had nations, you had trade. You had people going across oceans in primitive boats, you see, and things like that. In Stone Age times, for goodness sake. And but now you need all these legalisms again. Then you can control everybody with legalisms and signing something. That's it. Quite the act, isn't it? And yeah, and I'll tell you another thing too. If there's businesses want to have sales, they'll trade with anybody. Yeah, they'll trade all right. Yeah, they want money. That's what they're in business for, money. So you have all these fear things, fear. Oh, do what you're told, fear. I tell you one thing, I bet the EU, or I bet you Britain, and I've read some of the articles too, is probably given more than £4.5 billion pounds a year just to the parliament, this extra parliament in Europe. Or to its central banking system over there that just simply throws demands at you all the time to help bail out some other country. What a racket, eh? And then this one here, a look in the EU's unbalanced books. The EU's former chief accountant has laid bare endemic corruption, but our own politicians are too emasculated to care, said Christopher Booker. And that was back in 2009. This is evidence mounts on all sides as to how Britain's standing in the world is in sad decline. After 10 years as the world's fourth largest economy, we have now slipped to sixth place behind China and France in Wednesday's Daily Telegraph under the heading, "The UK will be missed on the world stage." Erwin Stelzer wrote about the failure of our military missions to Iraq and Afghanistan and lamented Britain's retreat from an effective role alongside our US partners. On the same day, Max Hastings reported a similar story from America itself, where he was shocked to find how far we've lost the respect earned in the days of Mrs. Thatcher. Another perhaps less obvious reason why Britain has lost respect is reflected in a shocking new book published tomorrow entitled Brussels Laid Bare by the EU's sacked former chief accountant. And that's quite the book, Brussels Laid Bare. Marta Andreasen. The outline of her story has long been familiar. In 2002, as the first qualified accountant to be given the job, she was appointed to sort out the EU's accounts, which for 6 years running had not been cleared by the EU's Court of Auditors due to a maze of irregularities. In 1999, the entire European Commission had resigned when, thanks not least to Commission whistleblower Paul van Buitenen, every kind of fraud and corruption has come to light. Miss Andreasen was born to a Danish father, lived in Spain, and worked for various multinational organizations, began her new job as something of a European idealist, hoping she could help to put things right. Soon she arrived, she was invited to meet the Court of Auditors. They welcomed her and expressed the hope that she could impose order on chaos, but warned that she would meet stiff opposition, not least from the powerful Frenchman who for years had been in charge of the EU budget. Although her book changes officials' names for legal reasons, he is identifiable without much difficulty as John Paul Mingason. As soon as Miss Andreasen began looking at the EU's accounting system, she saw that it was in a shambles. Between the 2000 and 2001 accounts, €200 million in 1 year, €200 million had gone missing without explanation. She was told these were loans which had been written off. You can imagine if you ran a business and you could write off all these things all the time, how long you can go for. But it's great. Taxpayers are fantastic, aren't they? That's the sheep again, eh? €200 million in 1 year. That's just 1 year. How many other years have they been there, eh? Had gone missing without explanation. She was told these were loans which had been written off, and senior officials were authorized to hand out huge sums without any proper records being kept. They're allowed to, right? They're authorized. Accounts were kept on spreadsheets which could be accessed and changed without leaving any trace of who made the changes. The system was open to fraud in every direction. Almost immediately, however, Miss Andreasen found herself being pressured to sign off the 2001 accounts, which, as she said, would be a criminal offence, since this was the responsibility of her predecessor and she had been given none of the information needed to know whether or not they were correct. It soon became obvious that her attempts to introduce changes were being blocked at every turn. The German budget commissioner, although initially sympathetic, was hopelessly out of her depth. Thus began a horror story only too familiar from the experience of previous whistleblowers, from Van Buitenen to Bernard Connolly, author of The Rotten Heart of Europe, except that Miss Andreessen insists she was not a whistleblower, but merely doing her job. Her telephone was bugged. She was followed outside the building. In desperation, she sought an interview with Neil Kinnock, the Commissioner, Vice President, charged with fighting fraud, but she described how he treated her with bullying contempt. See, they're all in the take, folks. I mean, that's what they're telling you here. Everybody's taking the money. It's like a third world country, this EU thing. Is utterly corrupt. Utterly corrupt. And they want you joined with it. And they want us joined with the same thing in North America, which is the same thing. If you realize how much money's gone missing, it's just astonishing. At Lord Kinnock's instigation, she was first suspended and consigned to a tiny office without a telephone, then dismissed, found to face disciplinary proceedings. So doing your job is going to get you in the court, basically. Just doing your job. Thus her life descended into a 5-year nightmare. She faced one tribunal or court after another, all finding her wholly to blame. And that's standard what they do. They always blame you, you see. It's always your fault. At one point, she had to appear before all the commissioners like a naughty child, only one appearing to listen to her, while Kinnock made grimacing signs to indicate that she was mad, a standard technique. Her book reads like a chilling cross between two Kafka novels, The Trial in the Castle. Yet this is the organisation to which our politicians have surrendered much of the power to decide how Britain is governed, and to which British taxpayers now hand over some £13 billion every year, with no control over how it's spent. On June the 4th, a minority of us will cast votes in elections to the European Parliament. By a surreal twist, the Danish, Spanish, Argentinian Miss Andreessen will be attending in the East Euro region as lead candidate for the UK Independence Party. Well, that's back in 2009, as I say. But, you know, that's the world. And, you know, as folk become more corrupt, they'll accept more corruption, you see. And people really are becoming more corrupt, personally. When you start tossing out the things that held you together, or your grandparents or great-grandparents together for centuries, you're just on the way down the slope, you see. And it's been said long ago that the people will accept tyrants and corruption to the extent to which they're the same in their own personal lives. Back up to the present, Canadian minister embarks on tour to save the trade agreement with the EU. And it says that Chrystia Freeland says CETA is the best way to push back against growing anti-globalization sentiment and to show that a progressive trade agreement can be done, you see. So there you go, see. Globalization is the next big goal, which means global governance, totally uniform, standardized system across the whole planet. That's what they're after. Remember, it's control freaks at the top who own it all. They don't take part in these things. They tell their little siblings down below to do all their hard work, you see. And they do. They do a lot of the work. The boys at the top and boys and gals at the top don't do anything. They don't work. They just own it all. Now this trade minister, Freeland, says it's a very big focus of mine right now, and of the Prime Minister. Freeland told the news conference Wednesday. She says we see CETA as an important deal, not just for Canada, Europe, but also very powerful today in its protectionist movement as a way for Canada and Europe to push back against the anti-globalization sentiment and to show that a progressive trade agreement can be done. And I think by the way, it can be done because really that they say that Pierre Trudeau is in power now, so they've got their socialist system in power, and so does most of the Europe as well. So I guess they'll get what they want regardless, given time. And of course, big corporations love it because the corporations are not what you think either. It's just independent, greedy corporations. They're part of this global structural system, and it would be much better for them in a planned society, in a controlled world, for guaranteed sales and everything else. You see. And then CETA to be signed again during the EU-Canada summit mid-October. Another article on the same thing. And it's quite good too. As I say, you have to read 2 or 3 articles or maybe more on the same subject to start to get an idea, because none of them will have all the same remarks in it. And some that will fill other parts in, the other ones will omit, and so on. So I'll put this link up tonight as well. And it says in this article here, the European Union doesn't just want Canadian products and services in negotiating a comprehensive economic trade agreement, again CETA, with us. It also wants our sovereignty and our soul. Canada should walk away from CETA, a deal scheduled to be signed at the Canada EU Summit in Brussels, October 27th. Otherwise, we may lose not just our Canadian character. In pursuing the deal, we may also lose much of our economy. The EU approach to trade has always been about more than lowering tariffs and ending quotas. It doesn't simply want an FTA, free trade agreement. It wants a comprehensive trade agreement. The EU sees trade as a mechanism through which its political goals can be met. That's why it still insists that its trading partners agree to everything from welfare policies to open borders. And actually, the agrees to an awful lot more than that, actually. As you've probably seen, I was amazed actually looking at a whole bunch of different countries that the UN is involved in, and of course the IMF that gets countries into debt and then runs the country for them, and then gives them little bits of freedom here and there by mandating the policies, social standardization. And so many of them in Latin America now, these countries, they all have the eco thing written into their charters for the nation. First and foremost, and then next part is same-sex marriage. Like that's a social thing that you must thrust on every country on the planet, regardless of its culture, because it's the global policy. You understand? This is all about standards. Don't forget that nothing stays standard. Once they have one thing through, they go to the next level. They've got big plans for all of us, what's left of us anyway. But using money, loans, to dictate how you're going to run your country entirely, and what's going to be up the top of the ladder on the importance level, as opposed to what you might think in that country is more important, like feeding the folk and giving them jobs, Quite something else, isn't it? Isn't it amazing to watch the power right now of globalization? And you can tell a small clique obviously run it and makes the policy for them all. And I've never heard Canada or any other country saying, look, hands off these countries and let their culture go through its own changes itself. For goodness sake, yeah, trade with someone if they want to trade, and that's about it. But you don't tell them how to live their lives. But again, socialism, really, this system is control freakism, and that's what they are at the top. They all know better how you should live, or even if you should be living at all, actually. I'm not kidding about that. I'm not kidding about that at all. In your lifetime, you're going to see mandatory euthanasia, mandatory, across the board at certain ages. And they'll train a population to believe it's all normal. It's not hard to do at all. Not hard. Especially when they can do it in the right way without telling the public, let's just save themselves all the money that would cost to treat you for something. It's much cheaper to give you a euthanasia pill and convince you it's the best thing for you, even though you might get through another 20 years with treatment and be quite happy with that too. You can unfortunately train the public to believe anything, as Bertrand Russell says. Proper training. Anyway, it says, Canada doesn't have strong enough labour laws to ensure decent working conditions or strong enough regulations to protect the environment, or enough of a commitment to sustainable development. See, all this is part of the total control freakism. Under sustainable development, they can get you all off the land if they say you don't belong there. And they can use the big corporations to, we can't supply electricity to you. It's unsustainable. You see. It's too far away now. And things like that. And then, of course, with under the eco this and eco that, they'll start adding the carbon taxes to your gasoline if you're in the rural areas, and tax you all the more for traveling on rural roads and so on. And it's all done with their eye in the sky and with their globe positioning satellites and watching your vehicles and in touch with its computer, yada. It's all been figured out way, way, way ahead before you even knew you were going to put these things in your cars. Then it says Canada's International Trade Minister, Chrystia Freeland, had an answer to such critics earlier this week in a closed-door presentation to Germany's Social Democratic Party prior to a convention vote on where to endorse CETA. Canada would capitulate. Her promise to change our labour and environmental standards to conform to European standards did the trick. The centre-left SPD, despite overwhelming opposition from its rank-and-file members, voted to allow CETA to proceed, but only provisionally, on the understanding that Canada must demonstrate that it had buckled under the satisfaction of labour and environmental lobbies. Private lobbies, and the EU's 28 member states before CETA comes fully into force. And the EU sees a trade deal as a way to advance its political goals. It's a pity they wouldn't tell the general public all what the goals are. I mean, I've told you what they are, but they aren't going to tell you. And you won't read their books, will you? Now, lab research shows inflation may be all in your mind. See, we're in a nation now where anything can happen with your brain, You can be one thing one minute and one thing another. All these things are all, just runs that way. So here you are. Lab research, you see. This will be from, no doubt, an expert, right? It's got to be an expert. So inflation is all in your head. And Luba Peterson has a lab work to prove it, you see. And Canadian inflation has cooled to near 1%. That's awfully accurate, isn't it? Wow. And Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Poloz tells us to expect interest rates to stay low. With a flood of money into the world economy, that wasn't supposed to happen, but a growing body of research shows the rate of inflation may be more mental than mechanistic. You see? When I heard about Peterson's laboratory work on inflation, my mind involuntarily strayed to rats in cages. But of course, the professor and researcher at Simon Fraser University is using human subjects to try to understand what causes prices and wages to rise. What could it be, And it says consumer prices are rising slowly, at least partly because that's what people have grown to expect. The problem with looking at real-world data is that you don't know what's driving people's behavior. Really, you don't know, since it's all given to them, says Peterson. But in the lab, I have a lot of control. She says that high degree of control gives her the ability to experiment with new policies because central banks can't toy with policy just for the sake of academic inquiry. Peterson's research is part of the behavioral revolution in economics. Rather than theorizing how people should react to economic signals, economists experiment to find out how people actually respond. I know how I respond. I put my hand in my pocket. If nothing comes out, then I can't buy it. It's very simple. And it says the researchers can talk about our experiments commissioned by the Bank of Canada, but our work shows some unexpected reactions to central bank attempts to push prices and wages higher. Everything's rigged, isn't it? Everything's rigged as these people prompt and push wages and our prices high. Prices are going up all the time, And it says deflation's a drag. Not just Canada, but much of the developed world is suffering low inflation or even deflation, which for reasons previously discussed act as a drag on investment and growth. Manipulative as it may seem, one way central bankers try to ignite inflation is to tell people they should expect it. But Peterson's research indicates that exactly how they try to do that really matters. Essentially, what she found is that if central bankers predict a higher inflation target and the economy fails to hit the target, people become cynical and lose confidence in the bank's predictions. One theory is you should try tea leaves. Not in the bags, of course, once you burst the bag. But tea leaves are pretty good, apparently, for reading the future. Con men used that for a long, long time, One theory is, and actually you could do a short course at university for that, couldn't you? Yeah. After all the giggy courses and all other aspects of absolute tripe and rubbish. One theory says people think central bankers like Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Pawles have inside knowledge about the future. Of course they are. So that when they hold rates down, ordinary folks assume the economic future will be weak. However, Peterson's research shows that if they make far less explicit qualitative warnings about rising prices and wages, they're more likely to be believed. You see, qualitative warnings. The traditional theory, one that many still ascribe to, is that low interest rates make money cheap. Then people feel free to borrow, invest and spend, thus strengthening the economy. That drives inflation up. And they go into the perverse effect and all the rest of it, you see. It's all in your head, remember. I guess so is debt, eh? Did you know that Alan Greenspan was a devotee of a movement way back before they made him the High Chutzpah? And it's astonishing. I used to wonder why, when this guy did mention he was going to walk out and give an announcement, he'd walk out on like a stage almost in utter silence. You couldn't get that silence if the Queen walked out, Queen of Britain. But he was like, whoa, a god to the public. That's how they put him forward to con you all. And he'd say, you just look, all knowing and wise, and then say, cool it, meaning cool investments and the whole bit and all this. Cool the economy, cool it, you say. You didn't have to qualify, just say cool it. And everybody obeyed. Oh, wow. But he was a believer in a doctrine that came out of Kantianism, where nothing is really real outside your skull. And then they mixed it with kind of Freudian psychiatry, which is a bit of a joke too, and was actually intended to destroy folks' sanity. And then they, in order to conquer them, you see, destroy them and rebuild them. But kind of like MK Ultra. But anyway, Greenspan believed, I remember seeing an interview a long time ago, it was on TV, where he's in this theory that nothing really exists outside your skull. And all you've got is these senses, and your senses can be deceptive or deceived. And Greenspan says, after all, he says, how do I know that you're really real? To the guy who was interviewing him. Quite seriously, he said this. And then he says, or this chair is real. He gave other examples, you see. And that's why he got the big High Chutzpah job after that. Because he could look at the debt and it didn't worry him at all. It wasn't there. And so there you have basically the con, you see. That nothing's really real. Don't get worried about it. All it's all in your head, for goodness sake. Which is meant to take you pull out that plastic and spend more. That's the intention of it, obviously. Quite something, isn't it? Now, what else has been happening? Well, you all know about the OECD, don't you? Well, you don't, do you? Because you don't really pay much. You're watching he said, she said in politics right now. What it is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It belongs really under the UN auspices, but really it's the World Bank and the Bank for International Settlements and IMF. All these private groups belong to the same club, basically, that was set up privately again a long time ago to help take the world over. Anyway, I'm not kidding about that, but that's the facts, folk. What do girls, women, and remittances and tax have in common? Need a higher place on the list of priorities this year, says a UN Habitat Conference, according to the global development experts. So these are the experts. You see, you got a global development expert who spoke at Davos on the sidelines of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Africa Summit in Paris, France. Quite amazing, eh? Africa Summit in Paris, France. Development professionals will come together the week of October 17th for the third UN Habitat Conference in Quito, Ecuador. 20 years have passed, and see, they have 20-year plans for this part, you see. It's interesting, isn't it, for the Habitat conferences. This is Habitat 3. So this is the 20-year plan, the 20-year plan, the 20-year plan. This is how they do this part. And they want a whole bunch of things done before they can wait another 20 years to see certain priorities come to fruition. The goal of the conference is to get renewed commitment from global leaders for sustainable urban development. So here they are into sustainable urban development. You see, once again, this is to do with population, who will get electricity, who won't, who can live in the country, who can't, yada, yada, yada. Agenda 21, remember that part? No private vehicles, no essential vehicles only, no private property, rental only, yada, 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 yada. Now they call it 2030 to throw you off. It's the same agenda. It's for 100-year agenda, Agenda 21. Anyway, it says, address urban poverty and take stock of new and emerging urban challenges. The conference aims to set the new urban agenda as its outcome document, which lays out plans for implementation and syncs objectives with the Sustainable Development Goals. So there you go. That's Agenda 21, Sustainable Development Goals. Millennium Goals do the same thing. And they give you a whole bunch of links, which I'll put up tonight too, for those who really are interested to look them up to see how it's going to affect you. Remember, this isn't just about Africa, believe you me, it's for the whole planet. That's what a global experts needed for, right? It says mainly in development field, political figures in African countries too believe an investment in agriculture will reinvigorate the rural economy and that urbanization needs to be reversed. So they don't like urbanization. Lauren Bossard, head of the Sahel and the Sub-Saharan Africa program at the OECD, told Deve. And they go on with their usual nonsense stuff. But it's control freak time, and if you think that's bad, just get used to it, because it ain't nothing to what you're going to see very, very shortly in the future. One little tidbit here is something else you haven't heard about either, that exists already, and that is, it comes from this little part of the same article that says, Pizzini said that the newer tax inspectors without borders, isn't that interesting, mate? A partnership with the United Nations Development Programme will play a role in recovering the more than $100 billion lost annually in tax revenue, according to World Bank figures. So it's quite interesting indeed. It's quite interesting. Really, people think they're politicians are running the show. You're snowed under with agencies galore that the public don't even know exist. They're international agencies because the whole goal and plan has been for their whole your lives and your parents before you, a world order, folks, a world government, complete global internationalism. You see? Well, not quite complete, actually. There's always an exception here and or there, maybe just one, who knows. Now another bit on Habitat 3 from another article. Advocates laud. Who's advocates anyway? Generally people who work there. Laud the Habitat 3 strategy's guidance on local climate action plans. Resilience, they can make that mean whatever they want it to mean. Energy efficiency, sustainable transport, Agenda 21, Millennium Project 2030, yada, yada, yada. Urban food and more. Remember, one big corporation will own all your food. Well, but they worry it doesn't offer the specific roadmap needed. And it says here that the draft new urban agenda is seen as strong on building urban resilience in the face of climate change. So climate change nonsense, you see, the weather, you know. A year on from milestone global agreements to tackle pressing development challenges and the threat of climate change, the UN General Assembly convened last week in a congratulatory spirit. I'm sure they are, as billions go missing. As the conversation shifts from negotiation to implementation, UN officials and experts are acknowledging the vital role that cities play in advancing those agendas. Remember the smart city programs and all that, and smart city growth and smart agenda, yada yada. However, world leaders fell short of recognizing the next major UN summit, Habitat 3, which will directly address the role of local governments in the global arena. On September 20th, heads of state commemorated the first anniversary of the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, which aim to end poverty and improve livelihoods worldwide by 2030. The next day, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon hosted an event to encourage faster ratification of the Paris Agreement on climate change. Today, these accords are the twin pillars of the UN social and economic agenda and will be for the next 15 years, you see. So, here you go. Again, as I say, this is part of a 15-year plan. Is to update it and update it and update it, and give you another 15 years off the next part of propaganda for, incessantly for 15 years to get you. So you think it's all normal when you go into the next part. And that's how you run the world, folks. It's not difficult, is it? It's quite easy. But so they've got them everywhere, you see, and they've got them all these NGOs and into your local councils and yada yada. I've even got one in Sudbury, It's, they've got the mission statement there, a network of organizations. Who funds them all? Well, I've told you who funds them all before, at least all their leaders. And your tax money also tends to go to them as well. Quite not bad. And you think your vote matters when you're voting for your politicians. It's a bit of a joke, isn't it? Rather sad that. That's how it really works, isn't it? I can't understand how folk want to ignore the real control over their lives. The real control. All the politicians do, and they're vetted before they get in, not by the public, by the masters, you see. Not one will ever fail to sign something they're told to sign. They'll sign it all right. They might play the game of conservative and stall it for a little bit, let the next bunch come in and sign it. That's how they play the game, to make you believe in sides, you see. There's only one side. Only one side. Well, from a wet Ontario, Canada, and from myself, Alan Watt, it's good night to me. Your God, your gods go with you.